Buenos días. Good morning. Thank you very much. Lord Mayor, Mr. Charles Bowman, Ambassador Bowden, good morning. Congressman, good morning. Comandante Cabrera, Chief of the Navy Mission in the UK, from Chile, of course. Ambassadors, lords and ladies, dear friends, good morning, everybody. The Right Honorable Charles Bowman is the 690th Mayor of the City of London, 690. He is also an alderman in the Lime Street ward and serves as Sheriff of the City of London in 2015 and 16. He's married to Samantha, a veterinary surgeon, and they have two daughters, Grace and Charlotte. Is that correct? The office of the mayor was instituted in 1189. And the first holder of the office being Henry Fitzalwyn, the London Stone. And the mayor of the City of London has been elected by the city rather than appointed by the sovereign since a royal charter providing for a mayor issued by King John in 1215. I mean, we have 500 years of history, and you first colleague, Lord, oh Lord. The Right Honorable Lord Mayor of the City of London is an international ambassador for the UK in the financial and professional services sector. And the UK is a leading exporter of financial services across the world, which is the aim of Invest, trying to have Chile as a services provider and services exporter as well. With no more words, please welcome Lord Mayor, Ms. Charles Bowman.
Well, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that wonderful introduction and that extraordinarily potent history lesson. Very, very effective. Bueno, señoras y señores, para comenzar, quisiera decir que es un placer para mí estar aquí con ustedes al final de unos días celebrando el país de Chile y su trabajo en el mundo de servicios financieros. Hace 25 años tuve la suerte para algún tiempo trabajando en Santiago para un cliente chileno de mi agencia de contabilidad PwC. Y desde entonces he sido un aficionado de este país, su cultura y su gente. Pero después de 25 años me he olvidado bastante de cómo hablar español. So it's back to English from now. But can I start by saying it truly is a real pleasure to join you all here for the 8th Chile Day 2018. And this event has become a key date in the diary for UK and Chilean business, offering a fantastic opportunity for us all to come together and forge new business links. And I am especially pleased to be here to continue strengthening the city's bonds with Chile, particularly since I visited Santiago as part of my Merrill Visits program in April this year. And as the 690th Lord Mayor of our great city of London, I do act as a key spokesperson and a principal ambassador for and on behalf of the UK's financial and professional services sector. That is a sector that employs 2.3 million people nationwide. It accounts for some 12% of our GDP. It is a sector that is not only a national, a European, but a truly global and international jewel. And as part of my role, I spend some 100 days abroad visiting circa 30 different countries, forging business links between the UK and international partners, and working with Her Majesty's government to grow our relationships abroad. Chile's long-standing relationship with the UK and our shared outward-looking attitude has made it a very obvious choice for our international agenda, not least thanks to our historical links. This year, we are both celebrating the 200th anniversary of Admiral Lord Cochrane's foundation of the Chilean Navy and his support for the country in its fight for independence. The history of Thomas Cochrane is an example of the deep-rooted links between Britain and Chile. Another is that of Antofagasta, which famously joined the London Stock Exchange in 1888 and is now our longest listed company on our proud exchange here in London. And during my visit to Chile, I had the pleasure of reaffirming these historical links, particularly within the context of British-Chilean business relations. It was a fantastic visit, and I was really impressed with the amount of interest around developing financial services innovation in Chile, especially in the emerging areas of fintech and green finance. And the visit did give me the opportunity to provide a message of reassurance that London will remain preeminent, the preeminent centre of financial services long into the future. And the strong community of tech companies within Santiago was also very encouraging to see. And I was especially pleased to speak personally to one or two of them, including Lazarillo, a startup that has developed an app which can support the visually impaired to access and connect with institutions such as banks or healthcare services. It was a fantastic opportunity to meet Chilean startups, and I am grateful to Banco Estado for hosting us at their innovation lab. I was pleased to see the appetite for embracing financial technology in Chile and the ambition to become a regional hub. And I hope that discussions this week have helped to evolve this ambition further. On green finance, I saw firsthand the results from Chile's recent hard work and commitment to this field, including the huge efforts that have been made to raise capacity and knowledge in green finance. And I was privileged to have the opportunity to speak to some of the leading voices of green finance in the region. And it is fantastic to hear of recent developments in this area, with Chilean company Aguas Andinas issuing the first green bond of the Santiago Stock Exchange earlier this year. I'm also delighted to see that organizations such as the Chilean Corporate Leaders Group on Climate Change, CLG Chile, are working closely with the Chilean business community to promote the global multi-billion investment opportunities that green finance can offer to Chile in its low-carbon transition. This is all very positive news. And I know we here in London are keen to use Chile Day to learn more about the developments that have been made in Chile across the financial services sector. as well as finding out what opportunities it will bring for UK and international companies with a keen interest in the region. With the topic of this year's Chile Day being innovation, it's important to look at how London and the UK might work with Chile to develop this important theme and area. London is extraordinarily well positioned as a leading hub for innovation. This is one of the messages I took to Santiago earlier this year, and the message I want to reiterate here today. The UK has an extraordinary and advanced fintech ecosystem. In the first half of this year, the UK attracted more investment into fintech than any other country. Over £12 billion, that's some 15 billion US dollars. And some of our leading scale-ups have raised capital in this sector has been further bolstered by a commitment from the UK government, which announced its fintech sector strategy just earlier this year. In green finance, the City of London recently held its second Green Finance Summit, which brought together hundreds of key stakeholders to learn about the sector's most significant developments. With London providing thought leadership in this area, it is very encouraging to see the real traction and real interest in Chile. We are also pleased to have announced recently a Green Finance Hub in London, the result of a key recommendation stemming from the UK government's Green Finance Task Force. And we hope businesses all around the world will be able to use the knowledge and research of the Green Finance Hub to progress in sustainable solutions for their own organisations. So these are undoubtedly exciting times for the UK and Chile, as Chile seeks to further its progress in innovation, and as the UK looks even more internationally for building business partnerships. I, personally, am very confident that we will see more Chilean companies doing business in London, as well as UK businesses choosing Chile as a base for their own expansion into Latin America and the region. Para concluir, quería agradecerles por escucharme y espero que tenga un día muy productivo. Gracias.
Morning. For sure, Lord Mayor has a better Spanish than my English, but I will do my best. My name is Alfredo Ergas. I'm chairman of the board of Invest. On behalf of the member of the board, I would like to welcome all of you to Chile Day. I have an incredible view from here, so after my presentation, I will take a photograph for all of the people that has been here sharing that so important event. So I would like to start with thanking who has joined us here today. Is the Honorable Lord Mayor, Mr. Charles Bowen, His Excellency David Gallagher, Ambassador of Chile in UK, and has been a key factor to help us to do that so great Chile Day this year. His Excellency Jamie Bowen, British Ambassador to Chile, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Felipe Larraín, thank you. Governor of the Central Bank of Chile, Mario Marcel, President of the CMF, Mr. Joaquín Cortés, superintendents, regulators, ladies and gentlemen. I'm especially want to thanks to Cecilia, Ana, Antonia from GV Agency for helping us to make that all of this happen. So thank you very much for all of you. I want to right now to thanks to our main sponsor, HSBC, Mr. Samir and Mr. Gerardo. Thank you for being here and all of his team, Katia and Monica. I lost Monica, it's there. Thank you one more time to help us and to support for us as being key your support and your partnership during all of these years. So thank you very much. We hope that it will continue. And also to the rest of our sponsor that has been very important to us, Amundi Asset Management, BCI, BCI, Compass Group, Credit Corp Capital, Drake Enterprise, Enel, La Rimbial, Moneda Asset Management, Picton, Provida, Schroders, Southern Cross Group. So thank you for all of them because they support the idea of Invest and they are part of the process of converting Chile as a financial export service. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm pleased to welcome to that is the 13th version of Chile Day. As I mentioned the other day, this is a very luck for all of us. So we're very lucky to be here in London celebrating this new event of Chile Day. This morning, I would like to talk very briefly about three topics. First of all is the historical opportunity of the capital market development. Second is a pending issue. Is the contribution of the financial system to society. And the third one is the role of Invest in this process. So I will refer to each of them briefly. First of all, as an historical opportunity, for the first time, since I can remember in the past 20 years, and many of you also has the same feeling, we have a Minister of Finance, Mr. Felipe Larraín, who has been committed to develop financial services and uses them as a platform, as a leverage the country to export services in Chile. He said that in the last Chile Day in New York, and he repeated this time. So we're very happy and enthusiastic for that support. The second pillar is the participation of Joaquín Cortés, a renewed practitioner in the capital market who lead the CMF. We know him for many long. We know that part of his role, as he has said, is controlling the capital market, but more of that, he wants to develop the capital market. So we are very enthusiastic about his approach, about the position of the new CMF in the market. It's worth mentioning that the second person that has been receiving the Investor Mercurio Award some years ago was Joaquín Cortés. The third pillar is the reinforcement of the Capital Market Advisory Council Committee that depends from the Minister of Finance and is chaired by Guillermo Tagle. The Council has materialized with different groups that function through active participation of several market stakeholders who are looking for the improvements and opportunity we may find. It happened often that regulation, even though they were created with good intentions and with a good objective in mind, do not work when there is a lack of knowledge of the market experience. We are all trying, and many people from here are participating in different groups, to find how to refine what there has been as suggest new things. And the fourth pillar is Invest. Working in projecting and develop the internal efforts to attract interest, resources, and focus from the international market. The systematic, sustained, and long-lasting relationship on association between the private and public sector who share a common objective strengthen this association. And here I want to make a special mention for the presence of the congressmen here. Thank you very much for support. I think with your presence to hear the intentions of practitioners of the market is very important, so you can move that effort to the Congress. So thank you very much for being here. The second point that I wanted to touch is, I consider is a very pending topic, is the contribution of the financial system to the society. I believe that we have failed as participants of the financial system in communicate to the society the benefit of develop and to have a strong capital market. We have not said or we are not communicated in a very complete way, that the fact that people can have a mortgage loan for 30 years, that is something that we can have in Chile, which enable people to live with dignity in their own houses, or for the development of all the infrastructure assets that we have in Chile that allow us not to slow down growth because they can be financed in the market with long-term bonds, or the consumer benefit with the possibility to access higher levels of consumption because of easier access to a credit, or the access for small and medium-sized companies for cheaper financing because of a stronger competition. All of those things are not very well connected. They are not thinking what people are thinking about, develop the financial sector. They are not thinking about those benefits that they have. So I think it's a pending issue for us to trespass that we have not socialized and not shared this benefit in such way. What have been said, we need to develop this in the industry of financial services export. It's not because those incumbents will earn more money, but because it also creates benefits to a society. So we need to reinforce that idea. And the idea is that a better and more competitive capital market improves the quality of life of the Chileans. And here is the question, how we manifest, how we share, and how we convince the people about that idea, I think it's a pending issue and we need to go for that. And the third point, finally, I would like to touch upon developments and work, a joint effort to transform Chile in the export financial service. The Board of Invest wishes to invite each of you to participate and collaborate with us, to be a complement to the Minister of Finance, the CMF, the superintendents, and all of the commissions that are working to develop the capital market. At Invest, we invite you all to join us in this platform, which is an open platform where anyone who wants to participate is welcome. We are in a process, I mean, it is very important, we're in a process of renovating and relaunching Invest, and we wish to integrate more stakeholders to complement those who have been us for some time. So let us work together with enthusiasm and motivation to transform Chile into an exporting country of financial services. So those was my 3 points. So thank you very much. And right now, I would like to introduce Mr. Gerardo Mato. Gerardo is a chairman of Global Banking and Markets in the Americas, and perhaps let me complement his title with saying that Gerardo is a very good friend of Chile Day and has been a key important person who has been support us in all of these years. So thank you very much. I'm very welcome, please.
Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you for those kind words. And good morning and welcome. Welcome to Chile Day, London 2018. It is an honor and pleasure to us as the lead sponsor of this prestigious event for the 8th consecutive time. I would like to thank Invest, Alfredo, for giving HSBC this opportunity once again. We're very pleased to be here in the company of Mr. Felipe Larraín. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Mario Marcel, Governor of the Central Bank of Chile, Honorable Lord Mayor Charles Bowman, ambassadors, the Board of Invest, value clients, colleagues, and friends. HSBC is proud to be a partner of the region's most important issuers and investors, leading landmark transactions such as the Republic of Chile's euro issuance early this year and the Chilean peso euro clearable bond in June, as well as the first ever Latin American corporate private placement executed by Codelco in Taiwan. These are just a few of examples of HSBC leadership in pursuing innovative solutions that effectively meet our clients' goals and leverage our global platform. Chile is the higher rated country in Latin America, we all know that. We're one of the most advanced investor-friendly economies. Chile is an important partner and a relevant part of the HSBC franchise. HSBC is a business that helps clients to capitalize on the continued growth of international trade and capital flows, wealth creation, particularly in fastest growing markets. Chile is an important part of that strategy. And our global network, we act as a platform for the multinational clients in the country and for the growing internationalization of Chilean corporates. Our global network put us in excellent position to connect clients from the region to the most significant global opportunities. Our commitment to the region is further reflected by our speaker today. I'm delighted to introduce Samir Assaf, Chief Executive of Global Banking and Markets, a member of the Group Management Board of HSBC, and of course, my dear friend and colleague. Samir has been fundamental in growing our investment banking and markets platform globally. His support has been critical in deepening our Latin American franchise, showing he's also a dear friend of not just mine, but Chile as well. Please welcome Samir Assaf.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for your kind introduction. My Lord Mayor, Minister Larin, ladies and gentlemen, to those who have traveled from Chile, of course, welcome to London in this sunny day. It's not often the case, but this year we have been lucky. And to you all, a warm welcome to the Chile Day. This is the 8th Chile Day held in London, and it's an event that HSBC is very proud to sponsor. For 8 years, Chile Day has helped create lasting partnerships between Chile and the rest of the world. This year's event will not be different, and it's perhaps even more important given the current external environment. As an open country and the world's largest exporter of copper, Chile can be affected more than most by the global economic outlook. In the first half of 2018, US rate rise, stronger dollar, higher oil prices, and growing trade tensions have caused a softening of investor sentiment. There is also potential for further disruption to come. Trade tensions between the US and China look set to continue. This carries implication for us all, but especially for those nations which are reliant on Chinese development and strong global supply chain. Recent currency volatility in Turkey and Argentina, for example, has also undermined confidence. And falling commodity prices create currency challenges for those countries whose natural resources are the main drivers of growth. This is, if you read the newspaper, it's easy to be pessimistic. But we must look beyond the headlines, and that's what I want to say today, and maintain a sense of perspective about their likely impact on growth and the ability of Chile to withstand them. First, the Chilean economy is a very strong economy. Economical activity remains robust. We're expecting a growth rate this year more than 4%, 4.2% in Chile. Low inflation, healthy current account balances, and a strong banking system are supportive of prudent fiscal policy. We believe copper price may be starting to bottom out with an improvement due next year. The sustainability agenda is becoming more and more important in Chile. We expect Chile to benefit as a producer of copper, lithium, and cobalt, which are important to use in batteries and in electric cars. So Chile will most certainly not have a hard landing. Chile may be even a safe haven for all the people who have a mandate to invest in emerging market, want to probably de-risk a little bit, and instead of staying in cash, will go and have Chile as a safe haven investment in these volatile days. The second point, and despite all the rhetoric about trade tariffs, the overall direction of global trade is towards freer trade and lower barriers. And Chile is leading the way. For the last 20 years, Chile has been a pioneer in forging closer trading relationships with the world's fastest growing nations, building strong and deep foundations for a sustainable economic future. And Chile is not alone in seeking closer, deeper trade relations with its closest economic partners. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership is a pact of 11 countries, which Chile is one of them. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia will be the world's biggest trade agreement when it's hopefully concluded in the next few months. The China-led Belt and Road initiatives will promote trade and economic integrations between China and the rest of Asia, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Trade and the common desire to prosper through trade remain amongst the most powerful drivers of global growth. Third, I want to talk about the long-term prospect of China, which is still very strong. And why is that? Why it's important today? Because China represents 35% of Chile's exports, and Asia represents 52% of Chile's export. China has already reacted by opening up its services sector, making it more attractive as a destination for foreign investment. We also see further reforms in the pipeline to make China's industrial policy more market-driven. This will ensure China continues to benefit from the sharing of knowledge and information that international trade and investment bring. Even more importantly, China is not the overwhelmingly export-driven economy that it used to be. Domestic incomes have risen and discretionary spending has increased. A wealthy new domestic consumer class has emerged, which demands huge volumes of goods and services. This has enabled Chinese firms to develop a deep understanding of the needs of newly affluent consumers. China has capitalized by shifting its export focus from selling labor-intensive goods to developed markets to selling electronic and machinery to emerging markets instead. In 2017, emerging market accounted for nearly 2/3 of China's total export. That's more than the US, the Eurozone, and Japan combined. So the impact of any trade tariffs imposed by the US could be offset by prioritizing export growth to emerging markets. In conclusion, it's understandable that uncertainty within the global economy is causing a degree of caution. But there is a lot that we simply don't yet know. So let's focus on the facts. Chile's economy is in a very solid shape. There are a series of initiatives underway which promote greater trade and economic integration between Chile and the rest of the world. And China's economic prospect, which counts very much for the Chilean economy, are strong, with trade and investment flows between it and emerging markets, and specifically Chile, set to grow. These are reasons why I believe we should be optimistic about Chile and about its place in the world. Thank you for listening, and have a very great Chile Day.
Thank you, Mr. Samir Asaf. Following today's agenda, we now have the presentation of Mr. Bernardo Larraín, who has been SOFOFA's chairman since May 2017. SOFOFA is Chile's oldest and most influential business association, providing voice for companies both locally and internationally. Its members are 160 Chilean leading companies and 70 Chilean regional and industry associations, overall representing more than 4,000 companies of different sizes and sectors of the economy. Mr. Larraín has a degree of business administration from Universidad Católica, a master's in finance from LSE, and he's also a Sloan Fellow from Stanford University. He also represents Chile as a member of the APEC Business Advisory Council and of the Pacific Alliance Business Advisory Council too. Currently, Mr. Larraín is a member of the board of Colbún, one of Chile's largest power generation companies, and of Minera Valparaíso, which is the holding company of the MATE Group, one of Chile's largest economic groups. Please join me welcoming with a big applause Mr. Bernardo Larraín.
So good morning, and thank you very much, Invest Chile, for inviting me to do this presentation, to say hello to the members of the Parliament, ambassadors. And I want to really congratulate Alfredo and the team for this event. It's my first time in Invest Chile. I think it's a fantastic event. It's a good opportunity to make a pause from the contingency in Chile and to reflect about our country, about our society, and about the business community, because the capital markets, the business community are all inserted in a broader society. And that's what I'm going to do today in this presentation, to reflect about our society, to reflect about the role that each of us has to do to collaborate to make Chile a better country. I would like to start by explaining who we are. Although it was already done, we're not as old as the institution of the City of Mayor, but it was founded in 1883, so it's a pretty old institution. Basically, we have a mission. The mission is to systematically validate the role of enterprises as trusted and relevant actors in the project of making Chile a more developed, modern, and inclusive country. As it was said before, we represent a lot of sectors of the economy, different kind of companies, the largest companies of Chile, also SMEs. So it's a pretty representative institution that really is the voice of Chilean business community, as well as my friends of CPC. So we are together in this boat. So when we took this role in June 2007, let me tell you a bit about what was happening then in Chile. The President Bachelet government was in her last year. The reforms that she proposed to Congress were already approved. So basically, the political tension was a bit low. So it was a good opportunity to assume this role. It was a good opportunity to basically rethink the role of businesses and institutions like SOFOFA, based on a new reading of a society that had gone through very important changes. So, and a few months later, we had the presidential campaign. And in this new role that institutions like SOFOFA should have, we decided to invite each of the candidates to an in-depth conversation in our offices about one specific subject, which was the modernization of the state. We thought this is the main challenge that Chile has. Many times it's not in the political debate because the political dynamics makes difficult for this kind of long-term challenges to be addressed. So we think that it is the role of these kind of institutions to put things on the table which are not necessarily protagonists in the political debate. So that's what we did with the 6 candidates to the presidency in September last year. Then it came the election, and I think it's important to say, especially when you are in a foreign country, that witnessing the election day, where you have results, 1 hour after the election day is closed, when you have the President Bachelet saying hello to President Piñera, to the elected president, and you have the candidate who lost the election also saying hello very fast to the winning candidate, I think it's to feel really proud of Chile. It's a symbol of the strength of our country and its democracy. as well as the inauguration date. I had the luck to be there, you know, and it's really a ceremony, a republic ceremony, which is, again, a very deep reason to really feel proud about our country. There's so many times we talk about the trust crisis, the things that are going bad in Chile, and I think it's important to say here that it is a great country, it is a solid democracy, and these two symbols are a proof of that. Well, after the inauguration, 6 months later, President Piñera presented his government structural reforms, the second phase, he called it, starting with a tax reform that Minister Larraín presented to Congress some days ago. Before that, it was presented another very important reform, which is to modernize the whole institutional framework to get environmental permits, which I really think is one of the key factors to reactivate investment. In September, there will come pension reforms, the labor reform, and therefore tension, which is natural, is back to the public debate, you know. I think we should not dramatize intense political debate. We should not dramatize tension, but we do think that we have to learn from past experiences. I think the debate around the 2014 reforms was too much confrontation. And as we are starting a new period of structural reforms, I think we have to think, how do we do it better? So I think being in this nice city of London, making a pause of the contingency, it's a great opportunity to revisit our understanding of what is happening in our society, and to revisit, in our case, what's the role of businesses and what's the role of institutions that represent businesses. And I will propose a kind of twist in the normal analysis. We normally analyze the glass half empty of our society, the crisis of trust, and we also normally analyze what we should do. So the twist would be that I would rather analyze the glass half full of Chile and its society, and in respect to what we're doing, so instead of saying what we should do, I will tell you what we are doing already as a business community. So the glass half full, and I will base this analysis. We basically undertook 3 studies, 3 surveys. One, it is an anthropological study that we did to understand how Chileans build trust, both on other people and on institutions. We also did a survey based on this anthropological study, and finally we did a big data analysis. And these 3 studies will be used to build a new trust barometer that we will launch in October in our annual meeting of the business community that will take place this year in Valparaiso. So you're all invited to that meeting. So let me anticipate some of the results of this study. You know, what do people expect in Chile when building trust? I think Chilean expect companies, for example, not only to provide high-quality employment, goods and services in an efficient way, but also to behave with high ethical standards, with justice, with fairness. And we found that people basically build trust on institutions in the same way they build trust on persons. So that's why it's so important, these other aspects, you know, transparency, high ethical standards, fairness. The second thing we learned is that Chile doesn't have a negative bias to companies, to businesses. They have actually a neutral attitude towards businesses. Businesses that they feel far away, maybe distant, maybe hermetic. And as they don't know it, they start in this neutral mood. And to move from this neutral position to take a position, basically, for Chileans are very important these 3 factors: transparency, justice, loyalty, fairness. So it's not only about what good and services we provide, the quality of them, the efficiency that we provide them, the good jobs that we offer, but also these more subjective factors like transparency, justice, and loyalty. And they build these positions interacting with businesses in 3 roles. First of all, as consumers of our products, obviously, as employees, and also they build perception based on the intermediation, on the perception they have of businesses through media and through social media. So those are the 3 ways that Chileans build trust or knowledge about businesses. Another finding, which is not surprise for all of you, there is a high level of trust on what it is close to people, their family, their friends, and very low level of trust in people they don't know. So people that they know for the first time, the trust is very low, and the numbers are here. Only 21% of the people say we trust in people we are just getting to know, whereas 95 or 76% say they really trust in close friends and family. And the same happens for business. There is a high level of trust in your own company, but there is a lower level of trust when you ask them about business in general or companies in general. 66% of the people answered that they have trust on the company they work, but only 49% they say that they trust big companies in general, which is, by the way, a pretty good number, you know. So numbers are going up in terms of the opinion of people towards businesses. So therefore, I think there is a high correlation between trust and closeness. The closer you are, the more likelihood that you will trust that institution or that person. And therefore, as I said before, these are the critical factors when an institution tries to engage people: transparency, fairness, horizontality. They are more, as I said, subjective factors, not what we normally do. You know, we normally say in the business community, people doesn't see what good things we do. People doesn't see the good quality of our goods and services. People doesn't see the good employments we offer. I think if we keep following that route, we will keep, basically hitting a wall, because people are demanding treatment, fairness, transparency, horizontality. There are factors which are equally important to the more objective ones. Another factor is that people are building high expectations, not only on government, not only on the President of Chile, not only on the state, but moreover in a more diverse range of institutions, including companies, including businesses. And not only for them to provide, let's say, private goods, but also to provide public goods, and for business to be involved in addressing social challenges. So, and these expectations toward institutions and companies are evolving at a much faster pace than the delivery of these institutions, than the transparency of these institutions. So there is a gap being built between expectations and actual delivery. And that's a second factor that explains why people express low level of trust towards institutions and businesses. So it's not only this being far away, the sense of not being a closed institution and not being enough transparency with a fair treatment, but also in societies that are growing at a very fast pace, like the Chilean one, the gap is increasing. It's not that Chilean institutions are performing badly. It's that the expectations are moving at a much faster pace than delivery. So my sort of a positive reading of the so-called trust crisis is that it's basically the lack of trust that people expressed is more like a combination of a healthy skepticism towards institutions that are perceived as hermetic, distant, and powerful, plus high expectations on them, and therefore a high gap between expectations and delivery. For instance, if you see the polls, you compare, what people think about the justice system. People trust less in the justice system in Chile than in Argentina or in Brazil, which doesn't make sense at all. So it's not that we have to turn down, the justice system of Chile. It's a matter of expectations compared to delivery, and therefore, if we don't read it in this way, the conclusions are wrong. So I've heard that I actually was in Enela some weeks ago, this business forum in the Araucanía, and the Fiscal Gajardo made a presentation, and he concluded that the justice system in Chile is the worst in South America because of this perception of lack of trust. I think it's not the case at all. It's a matter of expectations compared to delivery. So that's why I think we're not going through a crisis of trust. We're witnessing a healthy society that is presenting more complex challenges to its institutions and businesses. So I think this is an opportunity, not a threat. I think companies have a better capacity for adaptation because they are linked to the people that are conforming basically this modern society through its clients, through its employees, through the communities that they are surrounding the businesses. So I really see this as an opportunity. So when we started this role, we would say that business, politics, government, and civil society were links of a very important chain which was broken. And today I would say that we are in the complex process of rebuilding this chain. Those who persist, and I think really that those who persist in keeping it broken, I am sure that they will end up being punished by society. So what are we doing on this respect? Not, as I said before, instead of telling what we should do, let me tell you what we're doing. First of all, I think it's very important to engage and listen to as many actors as possible in the public debate. We've had meetings with the President of the Supreme Court, with the President of the Central Bank, with the Mayor of Valparaiso, with the Mayor of Las Condes, with different think tanks. This has to be systematic and permanent. We have engaged with civil society organizations to face, social challenges. I will talk about this later. The CPC is leading this effort of the three times I, which is also very important. It was started by Alfredo Moreno when he was the chairman of the CPC, and now it's been continued by Alfonso. And these platforms are good on its own, not only because we should expect results from them, but just the pure fact of talking and interacting and engaging with different actors is, I think, is a very positive thing on its own, regardless of the results. So that's one important thing: engage and listen to as many actors as possible. Second role, that the business institution like SOFOFA has is to promote, obviously, an enterprise evolution. And we have basically three dimensions to concrete this. One is the internal dimension, that obviously we have to promote best practices in our companies to build business cultures which are based on integrity. And the way we do it is basically to propose to our member companies a set of good practices in 10 dimensions, from how to relate to communities to how to for large corporations, how to be linked in a better way to the business models of the 21st century, how to innovate, how to be linked with the VC world. So we put together this document, which is called Enterprise Evolution, with almost 150 good practices, and the companies are measuring themselves on how are they implementing these good practices. And this has to be done systematically. You cannot publish a book and then forget about it. We have to do, on a yearly basis, a feedback analysis, sharing experiences, and then change this guide, every year. And I'm happy to see that the CBI, the Confederation of British Industries, is doing exactly the same. In September this year, just a couple of weeks ago, they published this document called Everybody's Business, Supporting an Outstanding Reputation. And they also propose to the member companies a set of good business practices. So that's the first way to promote a business evolution. The second one is to is more external to the companies, which is what I said before, deepening the connection with business models of the future. And Alfonso explained yesterday the digital agenda of CPC, which is precisely not only to connect business, but mainly to connect people, our workers, to the digital economy. We are also planning to do a kind of SOFOFA hub in our installations to connect our member companies to entrepreneurs and innovators that may present to them, solutions to problems they have. When in the current economy, it's much more likely that you will find a solution out of the borders of your company than inside the borders of your company. So we want to create this virtual and physical space in SOFOFA to connect our member companies to entrepreneurs and innovators. Also externally, a third pillar of this enterprise evolution is to strengthen our link towards society through basically, I think, business capacities of innovation, of managing, has to be available to address social challenges. So we're basically doing different pilot projects. This one that it's in the picture, it's basically a project to incorporate into the technical education and into work these young people who are out of the educational system and who are out of the labor force. So we design for them a special course in technical education, and also we have a program for these young people to work in a group of companies members of SOFOFA. So the idea is to build these pilot projects, to evaluate them, to measure the impact, and then if it's successful, to scale or to propose the government to scale this solution at the public level. So that's a third critical role, that business should do, in terms of this enterprise evolution. So we have to engage and listen. We have to promote enterprise evolution. And finally, very important, we have to be very active in the public debate, in the debate of public policy. We have to be promoting institutions and regulations for the 21st century. But we have to do it in a very different way than in the past. Not because in the past was done badly, but because times changes, and therefore the way we have to do this role is completely different today. First of all, we have to work with government, with parliament, but in a completely transparent way. That's a critical point. I think we all know that. Second, we have to engage with other players, NGOs, think tanks, universities, to collaborate in building our public policy proposals. They gain legitimacy if you build them together with other players. Thirdly, which is very important, I think, and I think Alfredo touched about it in doing a sort of a self-criticism about the failure of explaining the role of capital markets to the citizens. I think we have to also nurture citizens with evidence, experience, technical data, international benchmarks that support our proposals. Again, the political dynamics many times disregard this kind of evidence data analysis. And we really have the challenge to put this on the table, to make it visible to the citizens. And it's a difficult challenge, but it has to be done, I think. And why we have to do this? Because business have a very unique knowledge, which is based on its experience, one, interacting in real time with those regulations and institutions. So who are the people who really knows about how the institutions are working and how the regulations are working? The people who interact with regulation institutions and businesses all around the country who are interacting with these institutions and regulations. So we have that distinguished experience that doesn't have, for instance, a think tank. So we have to combine the sort of theoretical content of a think tank with the real experience of businesses all around the country are interacting with this regulation. And also we have the best connection with this modern society. That modern society is nothing else but our employees, our clients, our suppliers, the communities that are around of our plants. So because of these two reasons is that business should have the duty to basically try to nurture citizens with our proposals, with the evidence that support them, with the data, with international benchmarks. And the big challenge is to do it in an effective way. And for that, it looks to be simple here in the slide, but it's not simple at all. We have to communicate this in a simple, in a horizontal, and in a transparent way. And not only that, but also we have to explain how our interests are aligned or not to the general interest. I think people don't expect players that are active in the public debate to lack of particular interest. So, and actually, I think they're punished when you present yourself such as a pure sort of player who is really acting on behalf of the general interest. You have to recognize your interest. You cannot hide behind others' interest. You have to explain that you have interest, and you have to explain, especially you have to explain how those are aligned to the interests of the general society. So that's why we, as SOFOFA, we have presented what we think are 5 regulatory and institutional modernizations required to increase the growth potential of our country in terms of taxes, in terms of the process to get permits for investment projects, in terms of the labor, in terms of training for the work of the future. And one very important thing, which is relevant for the members of the parliament, I think it's very important, regardless of the orientation of the public policy, which is a matter of debate in the political arena, it's very important for public policy to be designed in a much better way. And also to evaluate the impact of a public policy once it is in execution. So every public policy that is approved in Congress should have a time frame in which it will be evaluated and maybe disregard it, change it, or improve it. And finally, I think we have to improve also the regulatory environment of the different sectors of the economy. There are some tendencies which worry us. like weakening the sort of concession rights. In fin, the way we are regulating negative externalities, we think, and maybe it's not popular to say it, that it's not the way to prohibit plastic bags. I think the way would be precisely what they did in Britain. The industry self-regulated to put together this plastic pact so as to have 100% recycling in, I don't know in which time frame. So, and this is important. We have to revalidate the word self-regulation, because the regulation will never have the plasticity to address the challenges of modern society, which are dynamics. Regulation will always be behind the changes of the thing that has to be regulated. And therefore, even though it's a bad word today, because maybe because of our own responsibility, because we have not been very active in self-regulating, but we have to make an effort to revalidate the word self-regulation. So a final remark. I think to rebuild the links between government, business, and civil society, we need to have a much better understanding of each other's role. I tried to explain what is the role, of a business institution like SOFOFA. And we obviously have we also have to empathize and understand the role of politics, which is different to our role. It's much more complex. I have to recognize that. You have to make agreements in Congress. You have to obviously negotiate things. So you will never have, the perfect solution, because there has to be agreement. So we have to understand the role of politics. But the other way around is also very important for politics to better understand that civil society, that business organizations like SOFOFA have the role to move the limits of what is feasible. We shouldn't be conditioned upon what is politically viable. So that's why we are promoting, for instance, a tax code which is more ambitious than what probably is going to come out of this political process. That's our role. We have to move the limits. We have to move the field of the discussions. We have to move the perimeter of the discussion. And that's our role, not to be conditioned on what is viable or what is not viable politically. We have to understand it, because that's politics. But we don't have to be basically limited by that restriction. And again, I was navigating through this, the web page of the Confederation of British Industries, and they entertain a survey. And they ask people, what do you think about companies to challenge politicians to do more? And 72% of people say, I like that, because people acknowledge also that politics, it's a process which has its time, its dynamics, and it's good even for politics, for a lot of people, in the perimeter of the political activity, to be putting things on the table. So in UK, 72% like that. So I think maybe I am going to be naive. Probably I will be naive on this respect, but I think the tax debate, which is starting, why not we take it as an opportunity to collaborate based on a better mutual understanding of each other's role? There is no doubt that the tax debate has a dimension which has to be pro-investment, pro-growth. There is all the debates in the world, even though in countries where are proposing tax changes to, let's say, redistribute better, which could also be a purpose of a tax debate, but none of them exclude the importance of promoting investment and growth. So that's why we have presented also our proposals, as well as CPC. We made a commission at CPC. We presented the document to the Minister Larraín. We also presented the document to SOFOFA. And again, the Confederation of British Industries is doing exactly the same. They published a document in August 2018, and this is the name of the document: Catching the Peloton, the business investment race and how the tax system can help the UK to catch up. So countries are competing for investment. Countries are competing for investment, and the tax code is one of the instruments. We cannot be isolated from the rest of the world. It's not going to be indifferent that Chile is keeping a tax rate which is much higher than the rest of the world. And that's not an opinion, as said Alfonso yesterday. It's a data. It's a fact. And this is not going to be indifferent to the Chilean economy for the long term. There are other ways to tax. I'm not saying that we have to reduce the tax collection, because there are so many social challenges that have to be addressed. But this debate is taking place in every country of the world. And the CBI is addressing issues like digital economy, and actually they are critic that a country in isolation deal with the taxing digital economy, because this has to be done at the global level. And how to tax work which is today done in a more flexible way. There are things which has to be discussed, you know. So just to finish, I think business and institutions like SOFOFA should follow this new path in a systematic way, maybe not expecting immediate results, but really being confident that it is the only way forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernardo, for your interesting and inspiring presentation. Following Bernardo's presentation, we have the privilege to have Mario Marcel, Governor of the Central Bank of Chile, with us to address us on the prospects and challenges of the Chilean economy. Governor Marcel was appointed in December of 2016, has been a board member since October 2015. Mr. Marcel has a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Chile and a master's of philosophy degree in economics from the University of Cambridge, United Kingdom. Prior to being appointed to the board of the central bank, Mr. Marcel served as a director of governance, global practice at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. in the United States, as a deputy director for public governance and territorial development at the OECD in Paris, and as a manager of the institutional capacity and finance sector at the IDB, where he had earlier served as executive director for Chile and Ecuador. For 13 years, he worked for the government of Chile, holding senior positions in the Ministry of Finance and the budget office of the Chilean government. He was also instrumental in the reform to the pension systems in 2008. His academic experience also includes teaching and research in universities in Chile and the United Kingdom, and advising many countries on economic policy. Mr. Marcel is the author of over 80 published works in economics, finance, policy, and public administration. Please join me in welcoming Governor Marcel, who is going to address us on the Chilean economy, its recent developments, prospects, and challenges. Mario.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to come to this event. It's great to be back in the UK. I've spent a few years of my life studying here, and but I'm a little worried about speaking to you now after Bernardo, because central bankers are not supposed to be very inspiring. So I won't try to compete, but rather to bring you some of the news that we just presented with our inflation report in Congress only 2 days ago, and some issues that emerge as we look ahead with the Chilean economy. So what were the main messages of the inflation report? Indicate that the economy is growing faster, and growth is becoming more solid and widespread in the Chilean economy. So the revision upwards of growth for this year actually is based on the fact not only that the actual performance of the economy has been stronger, as it's shown in this chart here, but also that growth is becoming more widespread. It's expanding to more sectors in the economy and to the different components of demand. Those projections and estimates are robust to a second half of the year that in the 12-month comparison will be lower than the first half of the year. That's something that we expected. It has to do with the comparison base, but also with an economy that in terms of speed of growth has to tend to normalize after a few years of very slow growth. Even if we look at the latest activity figures for July, they are very much in line with what we are projecting for the year. At the same time, in the monetary policy report, we also reviewed up the estimates for potential GDP. So for 2018, we moved from 2.7% growth to 3.1%. This is potential GDPs. That is the one that is consistent with a stable inflation at the policy target. And that means that the output gap that widened in the last few years has started to narrow, and it's getting closer to zero right now. Now, there are a number of measures of slack that indicate that perhaps there is a little more slack than these sort of conventional methods indicate. But the fact that the output gap is closing, of course, is a good development for the Chilean economy, but also means that it requires some response from the central bank. In particular, the question of the need for further expansionary injection from the central bank is becoming less necessary. Now, if these projections materialize, then Chile will outpace other neighbors in Latin America in terms of growth, both this year and the next one. Then the economy will look very much in line for a more sustained pace of growth. For 2019, we are keeping our previous estimate of a range of growth between 3.25% and 4.25%, and then 2020 is estimated at a range between 2.75% and 3.75%. A very important component or a very important factor behind these updated estimates is the behavior of investment. Investment grew at negative rates for a few years. 4 years in a row, we had the investment declining. That was very much explained by a decline in investment in mining, following the decline in the price of copper in 2014. But that is now turning around. And for 2018, we are estimating a growth in a gross fixed capital formation of 5%. And for the next couple of years, we are projecting investment to grow faster than GDP as well. Now, much of this dynamism in investment is currently coming from investment in machinery and equipment. But we are also seeing some additional response on the construction sector. And we hope that in the future, this may be reflected as well in larger projects in the country, but those projects then take some time to mature. So that is something that perhaps we will see more visibly down the road. Private consumption has also been revised up. Private consumption makes nearly 2/3 of domestic demand in Chile. So, of course, it matters a lot for economic activity. During the years of slow growth, private consumption provides a floor to economic activity. And now it's picking up following the development of the wage or the growth in the wage bill. That takes us to the labor market. And as usual, labor market follows economic activity with a lag. But we are already seeing some signs of improvement. The labor market didn't worsen a lot during the past few years. Actually, it had the ability to adjust on a number of dimensions. So unemployment, open unemployment, never mounted too much during the past few years. It is now at about 7% of the labor force, which is pretty close to the historical average for the unemployment rate in Chile. But the labor force is growing much faster than before. So the labor market is being able to absorb a growing flow of workers. That inflow of workers is composed, on the one hand, of immigrants, on the other hand, the result of an increase in the labor participation of women, and also in the growth of the labor force above 55 years of age. So the composition of the Chilean labor force is also changing, and that makes the labor market to work in a different way than we were used to see in the past. So that explains that not only that the wage bill is growing right now, but also that it may be growing perhaps even a little faster than what we are seeing in the usual statistics. In particular, the effect of immigration is not completely captured in official statistics that are based on surveys that then rely on demographic projections that are relatively old, that come from the census of 2002 and need to be updated. And when they are updated, then it will be much more clearly reflected the fact that today the labor force includes about 6% in all of immigrant workers, compared to something very close to 1% a few years ago. So I think it's also a positive development that the Chilean economy has been able to absorb this flow of immigrants, and immigration has responded perhaps in a different way than what you may have seen in other countries. Our monetary policy reports includes a box devoted to this issue, and one specific one salient feature of that is that the distribution of immigrants across different sectors and across different working positions is very similar to the local to the national or Chilean workers. So compared to other countries where there is a sort of the ghetto dynamics, I think that is, at least looking at the census, at the labor data coming from the 2017 census, that is not happening in Chile. And I think that that is a positive development as well. When we published a study on trend GDP a year ago, we noted this issue, and we noted that immigration is like a positive supply shock for the Chilean economy. We have not updated our estimates of trend GDP rate. We will do that once we have updated demographic projections, but it is likely that because of that factor and because of the increase in investment, perhaps trend GDP will move a little up as well. But we will learn about that probably next year. Now, of course, central banks are concerned with inflation, and our central bank has a very clear legal mandate on that. We adopted a forward inflation targeting a long time ago. We have been running that already for 18 years alongside the floating exchange regime. That framework for monetary policy has been pretty effective over the years. What we're seeing today in terms of the behavior of inflation is that after picking up by the end of 2015, it started decelerating, following partly the evolution of the exchange rate, but also partly the evolution of economic activity and the GDP gap. And now it is starting to edge up, but still being below the target of monetary policy of 3% in a 24-month scenario horizon. So in this chart, you see the headline CPI in light blue. You have the core inflation measure in red that, as you may see, in the last few months has been below the headline CPI. That means that what we take out of CPI to measure trend GDP, which is food and energy, has been putting some pressure up on inflation, but that is the more volatile component of it. Inflation for goods is currently negative, capturing the effect of the previous revaluation of the Chilean currency, and because of the change in the trend of the exchange rate, now it is edging up. Services has been pretty stable in the last few months, and this is an important measure because services are essentially non-tradables and respond more to the output gap. So this means that the current stance of monetary policy is well justified, but that as things change, then the direction of monetary policy may start changing as well. And then the message from the central bank there is that as the impulse of monetary policy becomes less necessary, and as the pressures on inflation may begin to increase because of the disappearance of the output gap, then monetary policy should begin to normalize in the next few months. Of course, we will learn about that as we move to next monetary policy meetings, but essentially that is a sign of a strength of the Chilean economy, that it doesn't need so much support from monetary policy as it did before. I think these two charts, I think, illustrate very well what has happened with monetary policy and what is expected from markets of its future developments. And you see there that our real monetary policy rate is currently negative, and it is the most expansionary of the countries that are charted there, except from Australia. And then on the chart on the right, you see the expectations for the evolution of monetary policy into the future, measured by surveys of business, of financial institutions, and the pricing from markets. Now, all that I have described so far is what we called our baseline scenario. And that baseline is based on the data that we know, on the projections that we can make on the basis of the actual evolution of the Chilean economy recently. Alongside a baseline scenario, the central bank also makes an assessment of risks for the Chilean economy and what those risks may mean for the trajectory of monetary policy. And since March this year, since the inflation report of March, we have been signaling a downside balance of risks for the external sector, the external sector relevant to Chile. The factors that are behind that balance of risks are essentially, on the one hand, on the financial side, the risk of the Federal Reserve normalizing policy faster because of the pro-cyclical stance of fiscal policy, for instance. It includes also the possibility that we can see further turbulence in emerging markets, or of an escalation of trade disputes. I should emphasize that our baseline scenario includes some initial dimensions of this. So protectionist measures that have been already adopted, that in the case of the US amount to less than 5% of their imports, those are factored in our baseline scenario. Similarly, we adjusted down the estimates for growth for Argentina, Brazil, and at a smaller scale for China as well. So that is already included. But other things that may become more complicated in the future, an escalation of the trade conflict, further deterioration of emerging countries are part of the risks that we feature in our monetary policy report. Now, those external risks have two transmission channels to the Chilean economy. One is the exchange rate, the pressure on the local currency because of an appreciating dollar in the international markets or because of a decline in the price of copper. The other transmission channel is through economic activity. If our trading partners grow less, or if we consider the effect of the price of copper on demand in Chile, that would have a contractionary effect on the Chilean economy and a pressure down on prices as compared to a pressure up from the exchange rate. So given that monetary policy is geared towards a medium term, it targets inflation over a 24-month scenario. What matters for monetary policy are pressures on inflation that may last longer. And that essentially means that the central bank is prepared to act in a counter-cyclical way if we move into a negative shock that may have a real impact on our economy. Now, all this you have to measure at the scale of the Chilean economy. What I mean by that? What I mean is that our currency is we have a floating exchange rate regime. So our exchange rate is meant to fluctuate in response to external shocks. It is not a surprise for us that the currency depreciates if we have a negative shock from abroad. Actually, it's a sign that the economy or that the shock absorbers of the Chilean economy are actually operating. And those shock absorbers are effective as such because the exchange rate risk, the exposure to exchange rate risk in the Chilean economy is extremely low. A good example of that are public finances. The minister is here. Government has more assets in dollars than liabilities because assets are basically the two sovereign wealth funds. Liabilities is a fraction, dollar liabilities are a fraction of government debt. Households have much more assets in foreign currency than liabilities. Liabilities, in Chile there is no indebtedness of households in dollars. It's very different from economies like Peru or Mexico that have an internal market for debt in dollars. But the assets of households are essentially the share of pension funds that are invested abroad. Thirdly, banks. Banks are required to hedge against exchange rate risk for a long time, and even if it weren't, actual practice after the financial crisis of '82, many years ago, is that it is extremely risky to have unbalances or unmatched liabilities in foreign currency. So the Chilean banking sector is completely hedged against exchange rate risk. And then you have the corporate sector. And the corporate sector has external debt of about 60% of GDP. Of that 60%, slightly less than half is debt of Chilean subsidiaries of foreign companies that have invested in Chile. And they take loans from their headquarters to fund projects in Chile. So either the rollover or the financial or the exchange rate risk of that debt is nearly zero. The remaining part of corporate debt is completely hedged against the exchange rate, either because there are assets in dollars or because they have taken, companies have taken derivatives against derivatives on the exchange rate risk. So if you look at the corporate sector as a whole, you will see that actually, if you add up foreign denominated assets and net derivative positions in foreign currency, that is higher than dollar liabilities. So that means that there is a substantial difference in the Chilean economy that is a reflection of two things. First of all, that the financial sector in Chile is much deeper than in other emerging economies. And second, that the structure of debt, the structure of balance sheets for all the different actors in the Chilean economy are very well balanced in terms of foreign currency. So it is a sign of the degree of internationalization of the Chilean economy, the fact that we have had a flow of foreign investment that is very important, the reflection that Chilean companies have been investing abroad, and then they borrow on with their local headquarters in Chile, but then they may invest abroad. So that is a reflection of the evolution of the Chilean economy. So at times like this, I think that times of uncertainty in the world economy, at times of uncertainty on emerging countries, I think that many analysts look for skeletons in the closet in emerging countries. Who will be the next? Our invitation for Chile is to look closer at the Chilean economy, dig deeper in our data, understand better what is behind our balances, the balances for all economic actors. Look into reserves. The reserve to GDP ratio in Chile is 12%. But we have a floating exchange rate regime. And then on top of those external reserves of the central bank, you have the sovereign wealth funds. And on top of the sovereign wealth funds, you have the foreign investments of institutional investors. And if you add all that up, you have more than 60% of GDP. So dig deeper, understand better the Chilean economy, and then you will see, first of all, you will be able to understand why we have weathered a number of previous shocks. Of course, we have not been immune to the external world, but we have been able to cushion those shocks pretty effectively. If you look, for instance, there was a reference, I think I saw a reference to the taper tantrum, or a reference to the China volatility in 2016. You will see there that there was a lot of movement in the Chilean exchange rate, but long-term rates in the domestic market hardly changed at all compared to other emerging countries. That is the same that is happening today. We have had a depreciation of the Chilean currency, smaller, of course, than in other countries. But in addition to that, long-term rates in Chile have actually moved by 11 basis points over the last 4 months. So markets, I think, understand the fundamentals of the Chilean economy, understand macro policy, how it works in the country, and I think that looking more closely is a good thing to do at this time. We have an agenda of things that we want to do in the future to build further transparency into monetary policy, into the conduct of monetary policy. We aim at being one of the most transparent central banks in the world. There are a number of initiatives that I shared with Congress a couple of days ago. I will not go into that detail. There are further steps in strengthening our financial sector, making it deeper, more efficient in the future. There are a number of changes that we are undergoing in the derivatives market, in financial infrastructures, and in banking capitalization. And I will just stop for 30 seconds on this last issue, because I think we are very close to have the new banking law approved in Congress. And that has a number of very important meanings, because that has, on the one hand, has a governance component for regulation of financial industries, because it includes the integration of the banking regulation into the Commission for Financial Markets. It levels up solvency requirements to the Basel III standards. Remember that Chile is still relying on Basel I and part of Basel II. So this is a very important step up in our framework for solvency in the financial markets. As a central bank, we actually moved ahead of that, because our liquidity requirements are already operating under Basel III. And it includes also the most important tool for macroprudential management, which is the countercyclical buffer. And that will be in the hands of the central bank. I think it will be an important step up in terms of our ability to manage and moderate the financial cycle that in many cases and in many countries actually tends to operate in a pro-cyclical way. So we have a very rich agenda ahead of us, but the good thing is that we have a very solid basis to work upon. So I think with that, I should just say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Governor Marcel, for such a solid presentation. 8 years ago, the Board of Invest decided to add a brief ceremony to Chile Day. We wanted to create a special award in order to publicly recognize the virtues and personal commitment of individuals that have contributed to the development, improvement, international recognition, and progress of the Chilean capital market. In order to increase and strengthen the visibility and public support for this award, we invited one of the leading newspapers in Chile to be a partner in the process of creating this award. This is how the Invest El Mercurio Award was born. The process starts by an open invitation to all Chile Day participants to nominate candidates for this award. And based on this open list of nominees, the final decision is made by a jury that includes all of the former governors of the Central Bank of Chile, past awardees, the chairman of Invest, and the economics editor of El Mercurio. I would like to invite Mr. Felipe Larraín, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Chile, and Manuel Fernández, editor of Business and Economics at El Mercurio, to present this year's award. This year's award goes to Luis Enrique Yarur. Mr. Yarur could not be with us today, so we would like to ask Gerardo Sperer and Patricio Romero from BCI to receive the award on his name. Please give another big round of applause to BCI Luis Enrique Yarur. Mr. Yarur is the chairman of Empresas Juan Yarur, chairman of Banco BCI, vice president of the Banking and Financial Institutions Association, and he's also a member of the Enterprise Advisory Board at ESE Universidad de los Andes in Chile. He's also a board member of the Centro de Estudios Públicos. Mr. Yarur has spent most of his career developing BCI to be one of the leading diversified financial institutions in Chile. This remarkable trajectory of growth has been recently crowned or enhanced by BCI's pioneer inroads into the US banking market with the acquisition of 2 banks in one of the most sophisticated and competitive financial markets in the world. And last but not least, he and his institution have been a big supporter of Chile Day over the years. Thank you very much. Gerardo has also been a big supporter of this initiative since the beginning. So thank you, Gerardo. Now, we are honored that Minister Larraín, also a great supporter of Chile Day and a pioneer in promoting London as a destination, is here to address us to present his views on modernizing the Chilean economy for a sustainable recovery. Mr. Larraín is the Minister of Finance of the government of Chile under the administration of President Sebastián Piñera. Minister and Professor Larraín was Chile's finance minister in President Piñera's first administration between March 2010 and March 2014. He was also a vice president of Chile in February 2014. Mr. Larraín holds a PhD and a Master of Arts in Economics from Harvard University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Universidad Católica de Chile. He has a vast experience as an international consultant, academic, editor, and author of 14 books and over 120 professional articles published in Latin America, the US, Europe, and Asia. Minister Larraín was director and founder of the Latin American Center for Economic and Social Policy, CLAPES UC, and professor of economics at Universidad Católica de Chile between March of 2014 and March of 2010. Previously, between 1997 and 1999, he was the Robert F. Kennedy Visiting Professor of Latin American Studies at Harvard University. Since 1985, he has served as an economic advisor to several governments of the region, including Bolivia, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. He has also been a faculty fellow of the World Economic Forum. In the past, he has been a consultant to the United Nations, the World Bank, the IDB, and the IMF, and he has also been a board member of several companies and institutions in Chile throughout Latin America, the US, and Europe. In June 2014, he became member of the UN's Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He has also received several awards and honors, including the Chilean National Award for Public Service de la Fundación Chile Siempre in 2017. He was named one of the 100 most influential world leaders in the Association to Advance College Schools of Business in 2015. The Best Sovereign Bond Issue Award was issued under his watch when he was minister the previous time. He was vice president of the OECD ministerial meeting in Paris. Economist of the Year 2010 for El Mercurio, Finance Minister 2010 of Latin America for Emerging Markets Latin Finance, 2002 Alumni of the Year for Universidad Católica. He received the award for Magisterio Nacional in Bolivia for distinguished service as economic advisor to the President of Bolivia. He also received the award as the best student in his class in 1980, the Raúl Iber Award. He received the Luis Cruz Martinez Award. So we certainly have one of the most awarded ministers of finance in the world. So please help me in welcoming Minister Larraín, a big supporter of Chile Day.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much. Jaime, you didn't have to read all the awards, you know. You can skip them, you know, it's no problem. Anyway, it's a big pleasure to be here in Chile Day and, you know, among so many Chilean and international investors in that look to our country at times that are challenging for emerging economies. With Mario Marcel, my colleague, we discussed and he said, I have to be, you have to say that I have to be uninspiring. I have to be a little less uninspiring, Mario, to bring people to Chile, you know. This is my role. We have slightly different roles. I would like to, you know, make the case of our country, but make it based on solid facts. Let me start with the macroeconomic view of Chile. Part of this Mario mentioned, but Chile's economy showed its best performance since 2012 in the first half of 2018. So we are growing at a much faster pace, but this is the best performance in 6 years. And we are not going to continue at this, you know, you cannot just simply project that line, but we are at a very different pace of growth than what we used to have over the last 4 years. So I think it's important to mention this. Also, I will do this very quickly. Mario mentioned this, that non-mining GDP growth has exceeded expectations. In fact, it is non-mining GDP that is pushing the economy. Why is this important? Because many of you think of Chile as a mining country, and it is a mining country, but it's only 10% of GDP. That comes as a surprise to many, that mining is only 10%. So it is the 90% of the rest of the GDP that is really pushing the economy. We have higher economic dynamism across many sectors. Let me say that, well, fishery is a small sector growing very fast, but it's very small. It's about 1% of GDP. The wholesale and retail trade growing fast, agriculture, manufacturing, and also construction. And I mentioned construction, some of these sectors are very intensive in the use of labor. So investment is recovering after 4 years of decline. It is important to mention Chile has had 4 consecutive years of investment decline, and this year's expectations are of a significant recovery of investment in excess of, well, the central bank has 5%, the market is expecting a bit over 5% of growth of investment, but then growth of investment for 2019 and 2020 also positive. This is important because of the, not only just pushing economic activity up, which is certainly an important issue, but also because of the effects on Chile's productive capacity and on the output gap. If the output gap closes too quickly, then we will have some inflationary pressures, which we will try to avoid. I won't talk about the inflationary front because Mario did it, you know, very, very clearly, and it's his realm. I will just say that fiscal policy is contributing to the control of inflation in our country. Consumption is recovering also strongly with a 4.5% growth over the second quarter of this year. And the external sector, we have exports growing at 7.5% in the second quarter, imports growing at 10%. A lot of these imports are imports of machinery and equipment. So they are behind the recovery of investment. It is the import of machinery and equipment. So these are all healthy issues. And I would also certainly stress the fact that productivity is recovering after we have had a streak of 4 years of declining productivity, but now it is recovering. It is recovering fast, and we had in the second quarter the best performance of productivity in 7 years, 2.6% increase in productivity. The economy is starting to create more and better jobs. It is not just counting jobs. It is also about what kind of jobs are we creating. We are creating a lot more of private salaried jobs. Why is this important? Because these are the jobs that have contracts, social security, unemployment insurance. So these are good quality jobs. And I think this is very important that we are pretty much multiplying by 3 the number of these kind of jobs. In the last 2 measures, we are at a pace of 70 to 75,000 jobs per year of this kind of jobs. We are creating 120, 150,000 jobs on an annual basis, but we are creating much more, the composition of the jobs has changed. Of course, in terms of the unemployment figures, we will see that unemployment may be slightly increasing, although it's pretty stable on deseasonalized basis. It is increasing unemployment slightly because we have many more people going to the job market. We have people increasing the labor force because they have better expectations of getting a job. So I would say that that it is also important to read the figures well, not just look at the headline rate of unemployment, but look at employment creation and look at why you have an increase. You can have an increase in unemployment because you're not creating jobs or because a lot more people are going into the labor market. So that's another issue. I will also mention that we have a big challenge, a challenge that is felt worldwide in terms of the effects of technological change in the labor market. I'm just mentioning here the case of wholesale and retail trade, a very important sector in terms of employment. This is by far the biggest employer of Chile. In Chile, in the Chilean economy, about 18% of all jobs comes from wholesale and retail trade. So by far the biggest employment creation. And what are we seeing? Very little employment creation with an increase in output in the sector. And why is this happening? Because we have digital trade. A big part of this, I'm not saying the whole explanation, but you go to see retailers and they say, well, we are competing with retail trade from companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and others, and we have to adapt. So it is not just the retailers from outside of the country, but the local retailers that will have to adapt and in a model of digital retail. Digital retail uses much less labor than regular retail. So that's another issue that we will have to see. Business and consumer confidence have recovered very significantly. We have in the optimistic, optimistic is above 50 in many sectors, wholesale and retail trade, construction, manufacturing, business, consumer confidence, and business confidence and consumer confidence are all, have all increased very significantly. And this is part of the recovery of the Chilean economy. A big part of the recovery is precisely this, is the recovery of confidence and trust. And I think this is a big achievement. Chile's growth forecasts have significantly improved. I just mentioned because what are the forecasts for 2018? Take external sources, the IMF, the OECD, the consensus, which is a group of analysts, and the economic expectation survey run by the central bank. And you have a big increase of, in some cases, more than 1 full percentage points in half a year. So you take what was expected of the Chilean economy at the end of last year and what is expected now, and you have 1 point and even more in the case of the IMF, which has increased from 2.5 to 3.8. If you take what has happened to other emerging economies, you see that there are very few countries that have improved their expectations, their growth projections and expectations over the last, let's say, over the last 9 to 12 months. And Chile is the country in Latin America that has had the biggest increase in the expectations for 2018. You have other countries that have suffered a decline in the projection and others which are pretty flat, like the case of Peru. We are happy to see that Chile is recovering its leading GDP growth position in Latin America and the Caribbean. In 2017, we were number 12 in the region at 1.5% growth. In 2018, if you take the latest central bank projection, we are number 3 after Panama and Paraguay, which are expected to grow more. Panama, based on the extension of the canal, the Panama Canal, and growing very fast for several years in a row, and Paraguay doing considerably well, and then Chile, before Bolivia, Peru, and other countries. So we are happy that we are recovering a position of high growth and a leadership position in Latin America. If you take the Pacific Alliance, a group of countries which are very closely linked, and we have this very interesting agreement, which is much more than a trade agreement. Chile used to be at the bottom in 2017 of growth. Now we are at the top of growth in the Pacific, within the Pacific Alliance. We always have this interesting, and I would say, a good-spirited competition with Peru. Peru wants to grow more than Chile, and we say we will make our best so that you don't catch up with us. So this is, I think, a good issue. Let me stress this, the resiliency of the Chilean economy. I think one of the issues about Chile is that if you look at the papers today, you see the problems that many emerging markets are happening. Mario mentioned this in his presentation. And I will ask you also, and I will reinforce, stress Mario's message in terms of taking a deeper look at Chile. You are sophisticated investors. Sophisticated investors do not go into herd behavior. Well, with all due respect, herd behavior is not something insulting. It's the way that is, because in economics there is a lot of literature in terms of herd behavior. Herd behavior meaning you take emerging markets, oh, let's go out of emerging markets. That's not something for a sophisticated investor. So take a deeper look. When you take a deeper look, you see that among emerging economies, Chile remains a very safe country for investment. We have the lowest risk in Latin America, measured by, for example, the Emerging Market Bond Index, basis points over US Treasuries. Yes, we have had between January and August of this year, we've had a little increase, but look at, we are in a much better position than many other countries, than all the other countries in the region. Chile is one of the countries with the lowest risk among all emerging markets. If you take the CDS, the credit default swaps at 5 years, you find a very similar message about Chile's resiliency. But we can look at many other indicators. The long-term rates. Look at long-term rates. We have the 10-year real interest rate in Chile is 1.4%. And if you take what happened between August versus January of this year, there is a 4 basis point decline in the long-term rate. Look what happened in other, interest rates. We're not putting all interest rates here, but look at other countries that have suffered big increases or significant increases in their interest rates. Of course, you take the case of Brazil, you take even Peru, 56 basis points, and Chile is -4. So yes, we have had it. This reinforces one of the arguments given by Mario a moment ago, that we've had some volatility on the exchange rate, some depreciation of the exchange rate, but look at interest rates, look at growth. And some people believe that we are at the mercy of the copper price. Well, we are not. We are not, because we mentioned mining is only 10% of the Chilean GDP. But also, we are not solely based on what mining does to us and the copper price. Is the copper price insignificant for us? No, it is important. But we can do better, even at times where our terms of trade are deteriorating, because a lot is in our hands. A lot is done internally in terms of the recovery of confidence and the measures that we can take. In terms of international trade, let me just mention Chile is on this index. It is the third country with the freest access to its internal market, after Hong Kong and Singapore. In a total of 7, we have a score of 6.4. No? Third country with freest access to to our domestic market. And we have 26 free trade agreements with 64 countries, which cover 95% of Chilean exports and cover 86% of world GDP. This is the widest web of free trade agreements in the world. Why is this important? Because if you have protectionism in some other economies, we have a way to protect ourselves from protectionism through our wide web of free trade agreements. This is not to say that a trade war will benefit us, but we can protect better. We are not immune, but we are very well prepared to weather the shocks of the external world. We have diversified the economy. Some people say, well, you are mining. Mining used to be 19% of GDP in 2000. Mining is now about 10% of GDP as of 2017. Non-mining exports have been growing very significantly, and we have a big diversification in a broadly considered industrial exports. Of course, many of these industrial exports are based on our natural resources, but these are not just the natural resources being exported. It is their processed natural resources. We have a very diversified international trade. In terms of exports by destination, by far our most important trading partner is China. More than a quarter of total exports from Chile go to China, 27.6% of exports. Well, a lot of that is copper, but copper is now less than about 80%. It used to be 95% of exports. Now it's 80% of exports. So we're selling many more products to China than before. For example, we are selling now over $1 billion of cherries to China. The Chinese have discovered some very special features on the cherries. The cherries bring, well-being, happiness, and other things, and we don't want to actually take them away from that view. So, we keep producing and sending good cherries to China. In quality of institutions, Chile stands as the country with the highest quality of institutions in Latin America in terms of government effectiveness, in terms of regulatory quality, rule of law. All this Chile stands as #1 in the region. Very important for a foreign investor. If you're a foreign investor, you want to have clear rules of the game. Well, which is the country in Latin America that gives you the highest quality in terms of institutions? It is Chile. Technological change. Chile is the country that allows for an easier development of digitalization in a digital world. The digital revolution, the technological revolution, you need to have a country with easy access. Well, that's what this international standards based on this global index is telling us. All of this, many of the countries that are experiencing problems, not all the countries that are experiencing problems, but many of them have an Achilles heel on the fiscal side. And we have a very strong commitment to fiscal responsibility. Let me mention it. Chile has a history of very responsible fiscal policy. Its fiscal position, it is true that it deteriorated in recent years. We've had a decline in the net financial position, and we have had a debt to GDP, public debt, gross public debt to GDP, that is now at 24%. But let me take this also with some caveat. At 24%, we're very close to Luxembourg, and we're, a little bit below Peru. There are very few countries in the world that have lower levels of public debt to GDP. Of course, what we are a bit concerned, about the increase on the pace of the increase in the level of debt. Doubling public debt in 4 years is something that certainly we wouldn't like to happen, and we are taking measures for that to happen. I was, just as an anecdote, the other day I was questioned, by a investor from Japan, are you concerned about your level of public debt to GDP? And I said that, well, we are relatively concerned, but you should be more concerned, sir, because you have 200% of GDP, in public debt. So everything is relative, The US is approaching 100% of GDP in terms of public debt, and this is something that certainly, what steps are we taking? Well, the first is a reduction in the fiscal deficit. Behind the accumulation of public debt lies an increase in the public sector deficit. We are reducing the public deficit through two means. The most important way in which you can reduce the deficit is by increasing revenue. And what is the best revenue raiser is growth. For every additional point of growth, Chile's public revenue increases by $600 million. If you take 4 years, you will have 600 on the first year, 1.2 billion, 1.8, and 2.4. If you add it up, $6 billion in 4 years, just based on growth, 1 percentage additional point of growth. The other is that we did an adjustment package for expenditure of 4.4 billion. We announced it about a couple of months ago, and we're trying to do this without affecting the normal functioning of public services for people. So we are controlling spending on the one hand, increasing revenue through growth on the other hand. We have a commitment to a gradual convergence to structural balance. For some of you who may not know, fiscal policy in Chile is done on a structural base, not on a current base. So we have a structural commitment, structural balance as a commitment. Our commitment is based not on the current. Of course, we make a projection of the current deficit, but our commitment is made on the structural balance, and we have this commitment to reduce from 2% of GDP that we started last year to 1% of GDP in the budget of 2022, which will be the last budget of the current government. Well, let me talk a bit about structural reforms for sustainable growth. First thing to notice is that we had these two concepts, trend growth. We have a higher potential GDP, which is, in technical terms, this is trend GDP based by an external committee of experts. This is the first time in 6 years that we have an increase in the trend growth as expected by or projected by this committee, independent committee of experts, a very important part of our fiscal policy. So we went from 2.6 to 2.9. What would we like to see? We would like to see this to increase significantly more. Our objective is to have a trend growth at between 3.5% to 4%. Not for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for 3 to 4 years, move to 3.5% to 4%. That is the objective of the government. In promoting long-term growth, we are also seeing that the experts are not only pushing up the expectation for 1 year, but they're pushing it up for the whole period until 2023. They do long-term projections, and this is what we are seeing. In terms of gross fixed capital formation, the experts are seeing a stronger recovery. This is the independent committee of experts. They are projecting investment to grow at over 5% for the next 2 years and then converge to 4% growth. This is also a challenge. We would like to see more investment growth, and we will let you know where. We have an independent fiscal council. It is now in Congress. I take the opportunity also to, for a special welcome. We have 4 congressmen from Chile here, 2 from the government coalition, 2 from the opposition. This, in particular, this independent fiscal council, we have a structural balanced fiscal rule since 2001. A fiscal council established by decree, and the fiscal council right now is going to a next step. to the next level of best international standards. We happen to have here the president of our chairman of our current fiscal council, Professor Klaus Schmidt-Hebel, and we have a member of the council. Maybe I'm seeing him over there, Gonzalo. There, Gonzalo Sangüesa. So we have two members of the council here. We are going to have it established by law. And we have added autonomy to the council, includes a budget for the council and technical staff. Councils will be elected away from the political cycle, so you will have the nomination and the replacement done by a process, and the process will go to a confirmation by the Senate. That is what has been voted by the House committee, the House Finance Committee, and this has been approved. The latest round of voting got the bill out of the House committee by unanimous approval. So there are also two of the members of the committee are here, so I take an opportunity also to thank them because of for their support in this very important bill. Of course, I understand that this bill, you have more curiosity about the tax bill, but, you know, is that true? Yes. Maybe, I understand there is austerity here, but can I have a little bit of water? Maybe there is water, yes. Thank you. When you get excited in the presentation, you start getting your throat dry, you know. And so, the council has many duties, and it will be a very important addition to our fiscal institutionality. We are going to a new fiscal institutionality, what we can call fiscal institutionality 2.0, and this is part of it. Of course, this has to go through a process. Thank you. A process of approval in the full House, then in the Senate, and we are very optimistic that we can get approval for this independent fiscal council. Tax system. Yes, we have a bill recently sent to Congress. The passage of this bill will not be as smooth as the fiscal council, I can say. Would you agree, Congressman? Yes. But we are also optimistic that we will talk to people we have been talking for a long time, to congressmen. We have been talking to senators, members of parliament. We have been talking to the social bodies of, and different organizations, the small and medium-sized business organizations, the business organizations that you have seen here, Mr. Alfonso Suet, Bernardo Larraín. We have been talking to many people, professors, deans of schools, to get their views before sending the bill. We will continue to talk and get good suggestions for this bill, because it is very important. We have a very cumbersome system. What do we want to do? Of course, we seek to improve employment growth, saving and investment. The focus is on SMEs and entrepreneurship, emprendedores. We want to have more emprendedores to make the road easier for SMEs and entrepreneurs. It aims to increase legal certainty and to be predictable for all taxpayers. The idea is that the legal framework, the tax framework that is established legally, that you know, or you have, better knowledge than today in how it would apply to you when you get a revision, let's say, by the IRS. When you do a transaction, we want to improve certainty. It incorporates the new digital economy following OECD guidelines. I will give a little more detail on this. It modernizes the taxpayer relationship with the tax authority, going fully digital. This is a very interesting case, and it safeguards fiscal balances. I will give a few details on this in a moment. We are aiming for a tax system that is more efficient and simpler. a fully integrated system. Now we have a partially integrated system. So what does it mean fully integration? The corporate tax is 100% credit against the final taxes and based on effective withdrawals. We will do away with the attributed income. When I studied previously the attributed income, I discovered that it was applied most, famously in the Isle of Man. But the Isle of Man is a small island with few people. So we said, why should Chile be the country that will go in this experiment of attributed income? Now we have two systems in Chile. We would like to have one system that only income withdrawals or perceived income, not attributed income. Instantaneous depreciation, there's a general rule for 50% of the value of fixed investment during 2019 and 20. We do know from all evidence and economic work and economic analysis theory that if you have a tax incentive, powerful tax incentive directly to investment, and that is transitory, you get a big shock of investment. We need an investment shock. And we have 100% instantaneous depreciation in the Araucanía region for special reasons. This is the poorest region of our country. We have an extension of incentives for middle class housing, construction. We're trying to help on the growth of small and medium-sized business. We're lowering the tax rate to 25% from 27% for small and medium-sized business. A very important part, the tax authority will make a proposal for the tax statement, the annual tax income statement for all SMEs, based on available information. And so the SME will get a tax statement, and it can accept, it's voluntary. You can accept it or file your own taxes. If you accept it, your cost is reduced, your cost of filing, is reduced to zero or close to zero. We estimate that about 900,000 enterprises in Chile may benefit from this measure. It's very important because we have about 920,000 active companies in Chile, and last year with sales over the last year. So I think this is a very important part. Instantaneous, for SMEs, instantaneous depreciation for all their investment spending. We are going fully digital in all tax documentation taken to electronic format, including the consumer receipt. Now, if you go, what would be the idea? Well, you have a regular business and you have a credit card. You go directly. Credit card is for, not everybody uses a credit card. So if you don't have, and you don't have this machine to do and to pay with a credit card, you can have an electronic receipt, using your cell phone. And we have an application at the IRS that with the IRS we're working on. We've worked all this with the IRS. We have an application that it will be for free to small businesses, so you get the application here on your phone. So you don't need to have a POS, you don't need to have nothing more sophisticated than a phone. Almost everyone has a phone. And you will have the application installed, and then you send the bill through, some people have said, let me just go a minute into this. They say, how do you control that they send it? Because you can have the receipt, you can have the application, but how do you control that the guys, hit it? Because we want to have a reduction in innovation, and we are projecting a reduction in innovation with a very simple procedure. We already control with the electronic invoice. We already have in Chile electronic invoice. So we already control what they are buying. And if you have a guy, a small business, that is buying 100 and selling 20, we will be very worried about him. And we will send a message on the phone saying, sir, we are so concerned, we will visit you. And I am sure that in that way, sales will go up, this will be done by the IRS, because you control already what these guys buy in the electronic invoice. The thing is, then you have to have a relationship between purchases and sales. We have a new institution, the Defender of Taxpayer Rights, el defensor del contribuyente, for small business. Why? Because this new institution, and this will be an independent, a new service that will provide, specially focused on individuals and small businesses that have now an uneven relationship with the tax revenue service. Why is this? Because they don't have, because it's a complicated scheme, the tax scheme is always complicated, and they don't have advisors, they're costly. So when they have a problem with the IRS, with our local IRS, they feel at a very different level, at a disadvantage. We want to sort of level the playing field for the taxpayer. New international standards, we are all for the digital economy. Great to have the digital economy. But having the digital economy means that, because you're digital, doesn't mean that you don't have to pay taxes. Because you're competing against established traditional institutions. The local vendor pays taxes. The small shop pays taxes. Because you're digital, you should also be paying taxes. We're establishing a 10% rate over the sale for many goods. This will not reduce the fiscal revenue. In fact, it will increase it. You say, well, 0.1%. It's really actually 0.14. But I couldn't, approximate it to 0.2. So what is it? It's about $430 million that we're estimating that this tax modernization bill will imply. Well, you can say, well, it has been well received by the Chilean people. Please trust me. No, we have a survey that says that 79% of the people, for example, they like the idea that reducing the tax from 27 to 25. An institution responsible, the Defender of Taxpayer Rights, 71% approval. 68% on expanding incentives to middle-class housing are for it. 54% are for a fully integrated system. And of course, because nobody wants to pay taxes, the less popular part is the 10% tax on the digital economy. We have also, overall, we have 20% of the people who say they do not know, and 6% that says maybe they do not know, and they say we'll neither agree nor disagree. But so we have still a process to help people understand what we have on our tax bill. This, let me go, and I ask you for a bit of patience. I'm moving as fast as I can, but I had to compress two presentations into one. So this is the second part. So I'm starting again here. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Why do we come here to London? What are the main objectives? We are aiming to establish Chile as a world-class financial center. Let me talk a bit about this. When you see Chile's financial system assets, including banking loans, pension funds, insurance company, mutual funds, we're close to 200% of GDP of financial assets. This is pretty solid for an emerging economy. Of course, there are countries which have higher numbers than this. In terms of, the private capital markets, you take loans and you take market capitalization, we are close to 150% of GDP. So in several measures, Chile has the largest, the deepest capitalization and financial deepening ratios in Latin America, and some of the largest in the emerging world. What measures we will take to put Chile? Well, if we want to become a world-class financial center, we should first become a regional financial center. So what do we have in mind? The measures: harmonization of regulations with international standards and good practices. Identifying and modifying practices that inhibit the process of financial integration. This morning, we have been discussing with a group of Chileans, mainly Chileans in a private meeting, what do we need to do concretely? Regulations. Not all of this, and most of this is not legal, but it is the regulations that are hindering the possibility of Chile to become a financial center. And fostering, of course, we have to be careful about the integrity, the good practices, and the stability in local financial markets. I will be very brief on this. Mario mentioned the general banking law. We are very close. What is the general banking law? It moves Chile from Basel, let's say, I said 1, yes, but it's really Basel 1.5 to Basel 3. So we're moving to the international standards in terms of banking. There's a new governance for the banking regulator, the adoption of the Basel III capital requirements, and new tools for early recovery of banks with financial or operational problems. This bill is already ready for the vote of the Senate. Because if it has changes in the Senate, it will go back to the House. So we will have a process, and we expect to have if we are, maybe it's not extremely ambitious to have during September it approved in the Senate, and then going back to the House for the changes that occurred in the Senate. So this is a very important process. I mentioned this because it has to do not just with getting the best standards, international standards on banking regulation, but also it has to do something with the fiscal liabilities. If we have better capital standards, it reduces the contingent liabilities of the state if a bank fails. So it is also good for the fiscal responsibility and for our fiscal position. We have a data protection reform, very briefly and very advanced. By the way, let me just be very clear. This general banking law, we're continuing the efforts of the previous government on the general banking law. The bill was introduced in 2017, and we hope to finish it in 2018. Same thing with data protection, which reinforces the data protection rights and provides a modern and flexible legislation consistent with international standards and treaties, and establishes a collegiate and independent body as the relevant authority for data protection. We believe that this new legal framework will foster the development of the digital economy and global services, among them financial services in Chile. We are expecting this to happen soon. We're also working, this comes from the previous administration, we are working to finish this as soon as we can. This is new. We will be proposing a new insurance legislation. Just as we're doing for banks, we need it for insurance companies. We need to go, it's like, and the idea is to go to a risk-based capital. It's the new idea that you don't have strict limits for investment, that companies, if you take more risks, you should have higher capital. So you're not, the previous legislation, the existing legislation, what it does is, so you have this limit and this limit and this other limit. The new legislation, and what is the sort of legislation 2.0 in terms of insurance, is that you take more risk, you have more capital, so you can respond. So your investments could be different than they are right now. You want to take riskier investments? Fine. But you need to raise more capital. And in this way, by taking riskier investments, it could help to develop financial and capital markets in our country. But it is going for riskier investments with responsibility. It provides the regulator with new faculty. Let me say, on this particular new insurance legislation, we have been working, the ministry, very closely with the Committee of Financial Markets, Mr. Joaquín Cortés. Mr. Cortés, hello. Mr. Cortés, who is the head of the committee, has been working with us and all his team. We want to propose, in fact, this bill was sent to Congress back in, some 6 years ago, but times have changed. It hasn't moved. It has been sleeping in Congress. We want to push legislation in this area to have our insurance legislation go to international standards. As I mentioned, the capital requirement will be based on the investment, operation, and technical risk. And the regulator, the Committee of Financial Markets, have performed 5 annual exercises for the definition of risk-based capital. So this we won't be starting from zero. These have not been revealed, but they have been done. You know, what if we apply risk-based capital? What will it mean for the insurance companies? Well, this is basically what I said. You know, we have, there's another issue which is important, is the early regularization plans. That you to promote a safer operation of insurance companies. When companies face financial difficulties, they will have to produce an early regularization plan. The sooner you can detect these difficulties, the better you can get a solution to the problem. So this is basically what we're saying. Well, let me go to the last piece of news. We will be proposing legislation on cybersecurity. We have been discussing this cybersecurity for the banks. The superintendent of banks is here. We have been working with, let me start by saying this. In this chart, you see the likelihood and the impact of events. Cyber attacks have one of the biggest impacts, but it also have the highest likelihood to happen. So yes, they have slightly less impact than weapons of mass destruction, you know, but they are more likely to happen. Natural disasters, extreme weather events, failure of climate change control, water crisis, these are the kind of things that in this interesting chart, these are the kind of events that have similar impact than a cyber attack. So we should all be aware that we're dealing, all countries in the world, with this. We have not been exempt in Chile from cyber attacks. The financial sector in Chile has suffered from cybercrime, yes, as many economies, attacks on banks, card information theft. We requested technical assistance from the IMF. The IMF has a sort of kind of world-class experience on this. So we had a team from the IMF that had numerous meetings in Chile with public authorities, the central bank, senior staff of the financial sector regulators, and the banks themselves. We had for 2 weeks this mission. We already have a report. Based on this report and the evidence and the work that we have been making, that we will propose new legislation. The legislation will be based on international standards. Regulators will have full and consistent authority for issuing cybersecurity regulations. What is the idea? You establish basic principles in the law, and then you give the authority to the regulators on the reglamentos, on the rulings, or the, you know, to establish the details. Cybersecurity requirements will be based on proportionality. What does it mean? That a common baseline will be established for all financial entities and special requirements according to the impact of the institution on the financial system. You have, you know, institutions that have more impact on the financial system. Of course, if you have systemic risk, then you will have higher cybersecurity requirements. Focus on detection and response processes. Implementation of monitoring systems to detect anomalous activities and events. Very important to act before the event. If we get some warnings, we act when we get the warning. When the problem has occurred, so the better thing is to have a, you know, early detection. Well, I think this is what I wanted to say about this. We cannot, I don't know whether this froze or, institutions will have to classify their information by expected impact of on the operations if confidentiality, integrity, or availability is compromised. So institutions will have to have safeguard and classification of their information. On governance, the law will establish a clear responsibility and accountability regarding cyber risk management, assigning an explicit responsibility to the board of directors, because after all, well, this is the main body of, and this is according to international standards. I would say that with this, we have a very full agenda. We expect that when we meet next year here, for Chile Day, that we can say that many of the things that we have mentioned here, that we have made significant progress, that we have already had approved some of these laws, that we are moving forward in terms of the regulation, and that we certainly look as a much clearer and closer issue, the establishment of Chile as a regional financial center and as an exporter of financial services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Larraín, for your challenging and inspiring presentation. Well, it's almost finishing this Chile Day 2018 in London, and with pride, we can say that this Chile Day has been again a very successful event, with the largest amount of people, participants, both from UK and from Chile. For that reason, on behalf of the Board of Invest, I want to make a special and final greeting to everyone who has helped in organizing this Chile Day. Minister of Finance, Central Bank, financial authorities, speakers, panelists, our main sponsor, HSBC, other sponsors, our program partners, UK government, and Chilean government. Finally, we want to thank you all for your presence here. We are certain that all the ideas, presentations, and conversations that we have shared along these 2 days will help to increase the interest in Chile as a reliable market, and hopefully will also increase the ability of Chilean market to be a financial services hub for the region. Now, before ending this Chile Day and heading back home, I invite you all to take part of the final event of this meeting, our official photograph, our picture, which will take place here in this same room, and then join us in a final cocktail. The photographer will be, follow her instructions, please stand up. Please stand up. We follow you now. Final 4 rows, please. Yeah, and remember to smile, please. Thank you, everyone. Please join us in a final cocktail, tasting good wine from Viña Errázuriz. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
nos ponemos alrededor del podio. Aquí, mira.
Alrededor del podio, ahí está. Eso.
Ahí sí.
Ya. Ya,
Adelante, adelante.
Por favor.
Ministro, por favor.
aquí.
Usted se puede subir aquí arriba del podio, ministro.
No, 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 aquí.
Muchas gracias. Esa es la mía.